Good Wednesday to you again, everybody in Gov 603. Welcome back to week 14 and our review of your answers from week 13. Okay, so before we dive into the questions and your answers and whatever light and additional reflections we might shed on them, remember just a couple of reminders during this week. And I know it's Thanksgiving. I hope that you are able to enjoy your families, but remember to keep working on your papers and keep working, studying, reviewing for the final exam, which somebody asked me the other day is it's a cumulative. Yes, the final exam is cumulative, and the way to prepare for it, excuse me, is to go back, review the discussion boards, watch my videos, okay, and make sure that you're familiar with all of the terms that we have had. So if you're asked what an R-square value is, bam, I know that right away. But as well as the operational concepts, what is the point, for example, of a simple linear regression? What distinguishes a hypothesis from a research question? Stuff like that. All right. And if you've been following along, you should know this just like boom. Okay, so the exam will open up on December 4th and close on December 5th. It's closed. Notes, no internet, no book, no recording, just you and your brilliant mind. And I know you're going to do fine. Okay. All right. Let's take a look at the questions and your answers from last week, week 13. See what we can say. Question number 1. Explain the following two terms: critical junction analysis and comparative historical analysis. These are terms that you see in social science, especially in social science as pertain to historical, critical historical methodology. And you need, when you see them, you need to say, well, I'm using critical junction analysis. You need to know what they mean. Okay, so Corey, you went first. Let's take you first. Critical junction analysis and comparative historical analysis are approaches used in social science research. Yes, they are, particularly in political science and historical studies to understand significant historical moments. Excuse me if I'm sniffling, it's allergies. And their impact on subsequent development. Here we go. Critical junction analysis focuses on pivotal moments or turning points in history that have a lasting effect on social, political, economic trajectories. Okay. And then we're going to jump down to the next paragraph. Comparative historical analysis involves comparing and contrasting historical cases or context to identify patterns, regularities, and causal mechanisms across different societies or periods. It focuses on understanding similarities and differences between cases and aims to derive generalized insights about a social process and dynamic. Okay, so excellent answer, exactly right. How is another way to put that? There are several theories that govern how to study history, and all of them get at the question of what makes history go, if you will. That is, what is it that determines a significant event and its impact, downstream, culturally, politically, like from that point forward, because everything is happening in the past. I mean, the present is so minuscule in terms of its time stamp that's almost non-existent, and we don't know what the future is because it's in the future. So everything's happening in the past. What is it that causes an event to be a significant event, to have a concussive effect? And there are a number of theories within history about this. Some say it's economic tensions, and this would be sort of a Marxist theory of approach. Some say it's tensions and it's interaction between the sexes, and this would be a gender approach. Okay. Pushing those particulars aside, there are two major theories and two major camps by which to look at and answer the question of what makes an historical event significant, and from what comes historical significance. One is junction analysis, critical junction analysis, and the other one is comparative historical analysis. Critical junction analysis looks at specific individuals and specific episodes and says, aha, starting with this person and this event, then there's this, think of it sort of a wave effect. There was this boom, concussive impact that went forward and had, effects on this populace, this place that continued or stopped at this point in time. It sees history through the lens of, and I want to use this word carefully, notable individuals or events. Notable in the sense that they're singled out as singularly important, not notable in that they're more important than everybody else, but sort of, because they're more important in that their behavior or the actions associated with them becomes the critical juncture from which things change. Comparative historical analysis, on the other hand, looks at and compares much broader events and trends, saying, yep, no. Yeah, and the two aren't contradictory to each other. Critical junction analysis doesn't say to comparative historical analysis. No. It's single events and single individuals that make things happen. And, the other one doesn't say, no, comparative historical analysis doesn't say, no. It's long trends and sort of broad social movements and changes. This drives historical events because, comparative historical analysis says, well, okay, true, you can have a noteworthy individual and a noteworthy action, but unless there's a broad social response, then so what? And how do you figure out what that broad social response is? Well, you compare the outcome over here in this historical context compared to the outcome over there. All right. So if you have, two people that stand on a milk carton in a park, one is in London and the other one is in New York, and they holler all day long about the coming apocalypse. I'm making this up, by the way. Okay. We clearly need more caffeine. And in New York, everybody goes, meh, and they just keep walking. But in London, thousands and thousands of people gather, and it turns into a spontaneous worship meeting that doesn't end. Okay. So what was the cause? Was it when you have an individual stand on a milk carton and start screaming about the apocalypse, then you get this greater awareness amongst people and sort of questioning of their relationship to Christ? Or was it the particular socio-economic conditions that were present in London that are not present in New York? Present as in, in place. Okay. So it's a different way. These two are different ways of looking at what causes historical events. All right. And they're not mutually exclusive. So if you see these terms as you're reading along, that's what they mean. Okay. Question number 2. Why is identity important for political science researchers? Is identity best used as an independent or dependent variable? Okay. Mohammed, the significance of identity within political science research, which should be framed primarily as an independent variable. Depends on how you study, but well, that's fine. That's acceptable. The authors emphasize the crucial role of individual the individual problem representation linked to identity in shaping political behavior and attitudes. In their approach, the authors identity is understood through the individual's cognitive model and belief, influencing how they reason and decide on political issues. This perspective enables researchers to explore how diverse concepts of identity, such as Israeli or Palestinian, relate to distinct political attitudes towards other groups. Okay, absolutely true. people are by their nature focused on identity. Let me make sure that this is placed in the right context with what I'm about to say. We are highly symbolic beings. I don't mean that we as individuals and as a species represent something else. No. What I mean by that is that we it's just, obsessed is not even the right word. It's just hardwired that we develop ideas about ourselves from the things that we use and the people that we associate around ourselves. Now, the question is sort of a chicken and an egg. Which comes first? The development of the identity of self from the interaction with, take for instance, those people who use Android and those people who use Apple products. All right, there's an identity that they develop, and it's reflected in the advertising. This isn't political, but you get my point. Okay. So the question is, what comes first? Is it the identity of self that lends someone more to become an Apple as opposed to an Android user? Or is it the using of the Apple Android that then shapes the identity of self? Or is it multi-directional? Is it cross-complementary? Okay. Let's take another answer, because this one is one I want you to remember. Identity. Corey, you went first here. Let's take you first. Identity, which encompasses various aspects such as nationality, ethnicity, religion, gender, and more, plays a crucial role in shaping political behaviors, preferences, decision-making processes. Identity influences how individuals perceive themselves and others within the political landscape. It affects voting patterns, political affiliations, attitudes towards policy, participation in political processes. Identity often leads to the formation of groups with shared characteristics or interests. Again, or shared characteristics and interests lead to groups. I'm not criticizing you, Corey, but that's the open-ended question. Identity is best used as an independent variable. Okay, and it's frequently used as an independent variable. Now, it's interesting that you say, you point out here, Corey, it affects voting patterns, political affiliations, attitudes, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if you remember, but way back, was it the 2016 run-up? Maybe even further back than that. I'm trying to remember when it was that Mitt Romney was seeking the nomination for the Republican Party for the candidate of president. Was it 2016 or was it even back before that? Anyway, but someone caught him on a hot mic, meaning like they had turned on their cell phone, at a private fundraising event in which he pointed out how important it was to get to the percentage of people on the voting spectrum that's sort of that's in the middle between the two parties. Because he said, those people who vote Democrat, like 98%, they're just going to do it because it's a cultural thing. It's an affiliation thing. And those people that are going to vote Republican, 90, I don't remember if he talked about Republican as well as Democrat, but anyway, it's an affiliation thing. And people just went, what? Like we're not all, deep thinking individuals, and come on. No, sorry, folks. Because if we were all deep thinking individuals that carefully weighed out everything that we did and every decision, most of the companies that produce most of the products would go broke between spending so much on advertising and wondering if they're ever going to get anything back by way of profit. They just didn't know what we're going to do. And if we don't exhibit really regularized patterns of consumer behavior, which we do, I'm saying that we do, then they get crushed spending endless amounts of money trying to figure out who we are and what we like. But since we don't, and they don't, we don't. Okay, so this is why identity is important. Okay, question number 3. Sorry. From the chapter Trade-offs in Measuring Identity, a comparison of 5 approaches. Pick one of the experimental techniques suggested to measure identity. Briefly summarize the technique and discuss why you would use it as a research method. Okay, so you could have picked, and I'm not going to read through everybody who picked everything here, but by way of the test, just be familiar with what these 5 approaches are. So if you happen to see a question like, which one of the following is not a means by which to measure an experimental technique to measure identity, you'd be able to go, okay, that one isn't. Okay. Anyway, Patrina, you went first. Let's take you first. A method of experimentation discussed is in this chapter is the implicit association test, or IAT. This test assesses how strongly an individual's mental representation of items in memory are associated with one or another. Okay. Researchers use it to evaluate attitudes on identity and latent bias. IAT serves as a purpose because it sheds light on underlying connections, giving a more complex picture of identity than what is revealed by direct self-report. Good answer. And so I'm assuming by picking this, you would use, this is the one you would use. One of the tricky parts of asking, when you survey, asking people to self-report, is there's often an important gap between how much someone does something and how much they think they do something. So unless you're following them around or having them in some sort of experimental environment in which you can actually track the number of times they do things, like, how many times do you read front to back flyers about a candidate? How many political ads do you watch a week? And from start to finish, not just click away when the 3, 2, 1, the counter goes down on the YouTube. Okay. So unless you're in some sort of experimental environment in which you can track that numerically, quantitatively, you're at the mercy of the survey taker's perception of themselves. And the perception of self this is more of a rule than an exception. The perception of self is by rule different than the action of self. And that's not a criticism. That's just part of the human beastie. I mean, it for instance is very useful. I'm thinking back now to the COVID data and the linear regression we did and getting at those comorbidities. It's extremely useful to understand, say, both how many calories does the average person take in during an average week of food consumption versus how many calories does the average person think they take in during an average week of food consumption. And I say average because because it's Thanksgiving, so you throw out weeks in which there's culturally big meals. Okay, so understanding the actual numbers and the perceived numbers becomes very helpful in suggesting course of action for the individual. Same thing's true with voting. How informed is someone about a candidate's positions and policies, say through reading campaign material, versus how much do they think they've read and how informed do they assume they are? Is their assumption of informed about the candidate grounded in information that they've taken in, or is their assumption of informed about the candidate grounded in how they feel about the candidate? So tracking the difference between the perceived and actual is important. It's a real thing. Okay. Okay. And I'm not going to read through the other 4, so just make sure that you're familiar with it. Okay. Question number 4. Why, according to Pearson, are the trends in politics much harder to measure than those in economics? And I don't necessarily agree with this author on this, but I'm asking you, what does the author think? Pearson explains, Karina, let's go with you. Pearson explains that politics is much harder to explain than economics because the complexity of politics. Since economics has such a quantifiable aspect, it makes it much easier to explain. Politics, on the other hand, has varying factors that can make it very hard to quantify or identify a single causal explanation for certain aspects. I agree with Pearson. in this aspect, because even though both politics and economics are ever changing, it's easier to look at economic trends than political ones. Okay, in general, and Karina, good answer. In general, yes, this is true. Where I say I disagree with the author, it depends on what you mean by economics. If what you're talking about when you say economics is, say, why interest rates go up and down. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. You pump too much money into the system, into circulation, and that devalues the currency, and that drives up interest rates. Okay. But if what you mean by economics is, say, why are people buying this thing? As now we move through Thanksgiving and towards Black Friday. And I've never understood the association between the name and the date. But anyway, why are people purchasing a certain item for Christmas this year as opposed to last year? Why will they tolerate a certain price point for the same item at other times of the year that they won't tolerate during a holiday season? All of these things could be considered economic, but they are, just like politics, grounded in human behavior, which, yes, I mean, Karina, you get it, functionally right. That the further you get into the human behavior side of the variables, the harder it becomes to pin down a single causal explanation. Like, why did Van Gogh cut off his ear? Okay, so that's why. All right. And I think the other thing, to be fair to the author, I think the other reason that politics is more difficult to track than economics is the distance between perceived impact and even actual impact. So if I go to the store and I buy, I'm just going to make up an amount. I could go to this store and buy $100 worth of groceries and get one bag of food. Or I could go to this store and buy $100 worth of groceries and get 2 bags of food. Okay. The impact, the outcome is immediate. I have twice as much food for the same amount of money if I go here as opposed to here. And then I am less that amount of money from my total money. So this is something that comes home immediately. Politics there, it's delayed, right? It's not like if I, if I vote for this candidate, then tomorrow I have this much less or more money. Now, eventually, if tax policy changes and these things, that may turn out that way, but the impact of the behavior is not as immediate as the impact of economic behavior. And as a consequence, people's behavior tends to wander around a little bit more, where questions and actions of politics are concerned, as opposed to economic actions and decisions. Okay. All right, everybody. Keep up the good work. Enjoy the Thanksgiving. I hope everybody gets to spend time with those that you love. And hang in there. We're almost done. All right. I'm thinking about you. I'm praying about you. And I will see you on Canvas. Bye-bye.